Hello and welcome to our session for TSIN this year. We are excited to be here. My name is Andrew Fultz, and
I'm Katie Roy.
yes, we teach at South-Doyle High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. And our presentation is entitled Why No Sidewalks? How Social Studies and STEM Intersect. And we chose this because we're big fans of The Office. And if you have seen The Office before, there's a character from by the name of Kevin Malone, and he famously says, "Why use many word when few word do trick?" And so that's why our guiding question for this PBL unit that utilizes the design thinking process is, why no sidewalks?
All right, so as already introduced, our focus is on why no sidewalks, and specifically in South Knoxville, why we have a lack of sidewalks and where students could say those should be. So we're intersecting that de-thinking process with our social studies standards and kind of contemporary issues and interaction with community partners. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so what we're going to go through, this is, as a teacher, have to have our agenda on our slides. So introductions, did that. Our topic 1 is going through what the de-thinking process is, if you're not already familiar with it. Topic 2 is how did we do this? How did we design our PBL? Topic 3, what is our PBL, which Fultz is going to talk about, what it is, what goes into it, and your takeaways from our session, and then any questions that we could clear up for you. Right, next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so why no sidewalks? Solving a community problem using STEM. So our community problem is the access to sidewalks, safely accessing public transportation in the communities that it's affecting, and then using STEM and the de-thinking process to solve that problem. All right, next slide, and we'll get into the de-thinking process. So the first step, and it's really cool being able to present this while we're actually working on this project, because I just started my kids on it today. The first step is empathizing. So building and understanding empathy. We work with high schoolers. I'm not sure how well middle schooler and elementary schoolers are with empathy, but even high schoolers aren't that great at knowing what it is and how to practice it. So we start with empathize, building a historical background, putting in context, and then saying, okay, why should you care? And building that up. Our next step is to define the problem. What exactly is the problem? And for us, it's why no sidewalks? And how is that a problem for people? So if you're a person that your main mode of transportation is a car, what is the problem? You might just say the problem for you is almost hitting someone on the street. But if you empathize with the people walking, the problem looks a little bit differently from their perspective. Ideating is one of the more fun stages, for me at least, where they brainstorm all possible solutions to the defined problem using empathy. So no limits at all. In this situation for our kids, they are brainstorming where a sidewalk could go. So ultimately, their prototype's going to be presenting a chosen segment of a road where a sidewalk should be built. And out of that process of empathizing what the problem is for people using those sidewalks, they have to ideate, where's the best spot for this? And why do I think it's the best spot? They test that, which this round they're going to be testing it by presenting to their peers and receiving feedback. And then they final present to community partners, which we'll talk about those specific partners later on. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so this is, I'm big on mental health, so the empathy section is my favorite. Other than the ideate, I love that big ideation part, but empathy is like my little baby. So what is empathy? How do students engage with this? How do you get buy-in? Why, looking at it, why would a kid care about sidewalks? So perspective taking is the first step, which the video that follows goes into these in kind of a cute little animated fashion to explain it. But perspective taking, what is the person's perspective? What's influencing their perspective? And this is huge for history teachers because of historical empathy. Staying out of judgment, not jumping to immediate conclusions about that person or why they have that perspective or why they have that experience. Recognizing their emotions and their struggle, being able to recognize that, putting yourself in their shoes, and then communicating it. When we're communicating in this situation with this project and product, they're not necessarily just communicating to those people they're trying to help. They're communicating the problem to someone who has the power to change it. So that's their role in the communication part. And this is all quoted from Brene Brown, who is a researcher specifically in empathy, mental health in general. So that's the subject of the video as well.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right, so to explain that video a little bit more and like the application of it, because that video obviously doesn't say anything about sidewalks. It's more so to ensure mastery and understanding of empathy and how it is applied. So that's what I actually worked on with my students today, and I have it in a 3-step process. So they first tell me what they think the definition of empathy is without any added information, just their own knowledge. It's really interesting because almost every single time, at least 2 students go, isn't empathy and sympathy the same thing? Every time. And so that's why I really like that video. So then the next video I show is actually Sesame Street. I'm going to spare all of us on that one, but it is Mark Ruffalo and Murray explaining what empathy is. And then I asked them to give me the definition again and see if it changed at all. And then I played the Brene Brown video at the end, asked them to change their definition again if it changed and explain any changes. And then I asked them, how does empathy help us in solving a problem? And that's why I used that video to define the difference between empathy and sympathy and make sure they have a real grasp on it. So whenever they have that moment where they're like, why do I care? Why should I care about this? I can say, okay, remember empathy, right? Who are we empathizing with? That's why we should care.
So, Katie obviously did a great job in explaining empathy. Now, for our specific project and what we're getting into, we cover, I don't know, it's roughly like 2 weeks-ish is what this PPL unit is about. And so taking that empathy and applying it directly to like why there's not any sidewalks, like students in high school love like automobiles. So many of them, when they turn 16, they are all about like their driver's license, getting a car, probably primarily to have some independence from their parents or other family members, guardians, whatever. However, the unintended consequence of that newfound freedom and independence is oftentimes they have to like get a job. And us at South-Doyle, our students, so many of them work outside of school. Like you really can't go almost to any food establishment in South Knoxville and not have a student working there. So that's like the ironic part of this, and maybe the tragedy of the automobile with like this newfound freedom is that they 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 don't then have freedom because they have to have a job and they're working all the time, and that it might even cause like some of their schoolwork to suffer. Now, that's like the context of what we're like delving into. Now, to get them to care in these first couple of days of this PBL unit, we have them read an article from the Knoxville News Sentinel from a couple years ago from a reporter who like tried out the Knoxville Area Transit Service, the public transit in Knoxville. We call it CAT, K-A-T. And in that article, he describes the challenges associated with like getting around Knoxville without a car. And there's many of those challenges there. But one of the big things he discusses is the last mile, where from the bus stop to your home within the city limits, the last mile is the most difficult. And if it doesn't have a sidewalk on it, it can be extremely dangerous. And so like that's one way we get like students to care about it. We also discussed the costs of the automobiles. Like students, most of them truly do understand like, yeah, cars are expensive. It's a reality in Knoxville that you need to have one. A lot of that is because of the lack of sidewalks. But the cost of automobile, like if they have a car loan or gasoline and insurance and maintenance, like all of that can add up to easily hundreds of dollars. And since we kind of started this PBL this week, I literally had a student tell me today that car insurance for him costs like $190 a month, which is like, I wanted to ask him how many hours working at Sonic would it take to just pay for your car insurance? Like, just wow. And that's not even counting the other things. Now, in addition to that, and having a dependence upon the automobile, like car accidents occur, drunk driving, a lot of that results in like fatalities. And so that's really like a higher price, even beyond the financial standpoint. Trains, there's a decrease in trains, and students know that we love trains. We're big into them. And so with the rise of the automobile and a decrease in public transit, like America really, especially in Tennessee, it would be awesome to go from Knoxville to Nashville for a train system, but that is not a possibility whatsoever. So to get to Thiessen, we would have to drive there, and there's no other option. And to me, also with a car, back in like the 1800s, with the frontier, Manifest Destiny, westward expansion, the frontier, many people think that shaped like American culture, and like in terms of like an emphasis on independence and individualism, and this frontier mindset and the shaping American character. Some people would make that connection to like, that's what the automobile does now. Like the automobile has your opportunity for independence and individualism, and that's just an extension of like the frontier mindset. There's debate there, but these ways, costs of automobile, car fatalities, a decrease in trains. We haven't even really mentioned pollution, which no matter what people feel about global warming, no one is putting their head in the exhaust of a car. everyone can agree not to do that, and cars produce pollution to some extent. All right, so that we're all on the same level there. And so those sorts of things is how we get high schoolers to empathize, to care. And then, of course, the big overarching question for all of this is, if you cannot afford a car, you're kind of screwed in Knoxville, and your life will look radically different, and you will be everywhere you go, it will take forever too. So those are some of the empathy parts of this. Now, when we transition after getting kids to care about this, even though they probably still do care about automobiles, that's not our point. Like, our point is to like get them to care about other people, and if they cannot afford a car, at least to be able to get around Knoxville safely. And that's like how we try to get people to care about sidewalks. Now we go to define it in terms of like, how did we get here? So a lot of this comes from like post-World War II suburbanization in the 1950s. And this is where we have a problem that is a STEM-based problem, a lack of sidewalks. And if you want to get a new sidewalk, you're going to have to turn to engineers. However, this represents overall like large historical processes where we got here because of decisions that were made in city governments and across the nation of suburbanization from the 1950s. So like, this is where social studies and STEM can really intersect. So the Interstate Highway Act was something that perpetuated suburbanization, with Eisenhower constructing about 42,000 miles of interstate to connect all major cities. This was a big job creator. It wrecked some of the environment tremendously. It decreased trains, the importance of trains, and going into the suburbs, like Levittown, which we have an image there. Levittown, this ad here for $8,000 to buy a home in the suburbs of New York City, like in Long Island. And so just wow, like $8,000 for a home. Black people were not allowed to buy homes. They were specifically denied mortgages by the FHA. And so those government practices and those homes increasing in value also created like segregation in America, very literally, like white flight to the suburbs and Black people in the cities. And so there's literal segregation. And of course, the automobile would be required to get from work in the city to your home in the suburb. And trolley systems are going by the wayside as well. And all of this, like when we bring it into like Knoxville specifically, we got a sidewalk map from City of Knoxville engineer. And this sidewalk map shows like where all the sidewalks are in Knoxville. And so we see really clearly, like the further you get away, and once you get with homes being built post World War II, they really don't have a sidewalk because of those large historical processes of automobile, suburbs, Interstate Act. We also then show them, to define this whole problem, the City of Knoxville budget and what the City of Knoxville chooses to spend their money on. We do this through a fun activity with a breakout box where the students like have to look for clues in like a very abbreviated version of the City of Knoxville's budget, but it's basically designed to show how much money the city allocates for what the city values and what the city does not value. And it costs roughly $1 million a mile to add in new sidewalk to an already developed area, like any of these suburbs, for instance, that were built in the 50s and 60s. And so like the city, with how much money to allocate, which can be like $1 million to $2 million a year, roughly, it would take 50 to 60 years to kind of have like a integrated, interconnected sidewalk system. And so we would all be long dead by the time the city actually fixed this problem of a lack of sidewalks. And so like, that's like some of our emphases here of trying to get students to care about it, but also see like the problem and the dimensions and the lack of money and stuff like that. We had them create a problem statement. How might we solve the issue of sidewalks in a way that overcomes? And then when they are thinking specifically about a road that they're going to choose to present to the city councilor, like what would be challenges specifically related to that road? And then we also had them create a survey because we want them to know their audience, and their audience is politicians that care about people's opinion, at least in theory. And so getting a survey with Likert style questions helps us to collect that data to be more persuasive as they choose their road in their presentation. So a lot of that is defined. Honestly, there's a lot there. We could go on. This is actually that map of where sidewalks are in Knoxville. And if you can see my cursor, downtown, the University of Tennessee, and some of the homes that were built pre-World War II are in red where the sidewalks are. And the further you get away from downtown, obviously the sidewalk system is essentially non-existent. The other thing we like to point out is the Interstate 40 moving east along here. The interstate and urban renewal and all that sort of stuff. South of the interstate is what we call East Knoxville, has a lot of suburbs or has a lot of sidewalks. North of the interstate, not as many sidewalks, definitely, and it gets a whole lot more sparse. Predominantly, this area is where the Black community lives in Knoxville, and then north of that is more white. And we look at census data to support those sorts of statements. This is some of the examples of the survey data that we had students collect. We have work to do with this new group this semester about crafting better questions. But this was the first time we did it last fall. And so we need to work on forming Likert questions. But like here, do you think it's necessary to have sidewalks? Well, most people tended to agree with at least this survey's response. There's other things here, but that was probably the main thing. Now, when we get to ideating, like brainstorming, this is how we love the Zillow assignment, where they, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned previously, a lot of things are running together, is where in South Knoxville and the zip code 37920 on Zillow, they will look up 10 homes. They don't have to necessarily be for sale or not. You can look at any home if you zoom in far enough, and they're to document how old, when was the home built, and then get on Google Street View and to see if it has a sidewalk or not. They also look up how expensive the homes are, which I do find to be fascinating as well, see if there's a correlation. But that's like getting them brainstorming, like, okay, here's all these roads. Where would the best place to put this sidewalk with our limited City of Knoxville budget? Now, the other thing we have them consider as they are brainstorming where to put like a sidewalk on a road is the City of Knoxville in 2018 had like a sidewalk study of what they prioritized of where to put a new sidewalk in. So like, does the sidewalk connect to a CAT bus route? Is it within a mile of a school? Is it within the parental responsibility zone? So like where the buses wouldn't run. Does the road have a double yellow line? So if it has a double yellow line in the middle, then cars tend to go faster, and it might be more dangerous to walk along it without a sidewalk. Does it would a new sidewalk connect to existing sidewalks? And then do pedestrians already walk it? And what they do is they'll literally go out and look along the side of the road to see if like the grass is worn down, or maybe it's like dirt from where so many people have already walked. So that sort of thing is just what we have them consider in their ideating. Now, when they go to craft their prototype, where their presentation, they're picking their sidewalk and a road and advocating for it. We have a wide variety here of what it looks like. It can be Google Slides. It can be like a poster. We've done that before. Canva, using Canva to create like an infographic. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but they're crafting a presentation, and we want them to essentially choose a road and give good evidence as to why there should be a sidewalk there. Now, a lot of that, like we do check for grammar. We want them to know their audience and to know that it should look professional. We want images. We don't want a long body of text like a paragraph. We want less words on slides and more images and pictures. And then they can explain and not just read off of slides, which students tend to do. And that's like a big part. And then, of course, related to like what the city of Knoxville values, we want them to go through that checklist of like, does it connect existing sidewalks? Is it within parental responsibility zone of a school? Does it have a double yellow line? Like those sorts of things. And then we want to like get them to judge like if it's roughly $1 million a mile, how much would it technically cost in theory to the best of their ability? And who would this benefit the most? And so like the stakeholders and all of that, again, knowing their audience and who they're talking to in terms of like a city councilor. Now, after they have spent roughly 2 days, maybe 3 at the most class periods, creating their presentation, we will test it out in class. So we'll have in-class presentations where the kids will practice, and then we'll give feedback on, and we meet with each group individually, give feedback on what we, as this is a Katie Roy thing, grows and glows, like what they did well and what they need to improve upon. And so good feedback, because one of the things that we always say is we don't want to be embarrassed when they get in front of a city councilor. And so this is how we test it out. And maybe we need to do some refining, maybe even go back to ideating. We'll see there. And that's another couple days. And then eventually we get to the presentations where students get in front of, by groups, get in front of Sean Fitzpatrick, City of Knoxville engineer. He's like the sidewalk guy. And this over here is Tommy Smith, and he's a city councilor for South Knoxville. And this is like having a real life audience is like meaningful for students. Really, truly, like they really like they gear up like when these presentations occur because it's an authentic audience. And what we tell them is that like city councilors like Tommy Smith, the mayor will present her budget to city council, and then the city council votes on whether it accepts or rejects it or not. So like literally like they're presenting to people that can actually solve the problem. And in theory, especially with Sean Fitzpatrick, actually puts a sidewalk in. And one of the roads that came up a lot, Lancaster, which if you in Knoxville, like, you know, if you're not in Knoxville, you wouldn't know Lancaster Drive, but it's in South Knoxville in the city limits. And that is literally, students presented on that road for years. And literally right now, construction is happening and they're putting in a sidewalk on that road. Like it's truly remarkable. I want to take a field trip, but there's no way administration would allow us just to go look at a sidewalk for one afternoon. Okay.
Got to unmute there. So the takeaways here are, how do you apply this to yours, and how can you integrate this into your social studies class or integrate STEM into your subject area? The first step is just looking at possible community problems. It was one of our earlier slides. When we first brainstormed, I'm telling you, we brainstormed. We did the de-thinking process for ourselves just to make a PBL. One of the things that came up was, how do we get Johnny Knoxville to come to our school? Like that was one idea, and it's your ideate stage. So just think any community problems you think you could work on, and then look at that list. Do any of those align with possible standards? And so we stumbled upon sidewalks and we're like, okay, this is a great idea. What could it align with? And we're like, oh, it can align with Eisenhower. It can align with redlining and our white flight. It can go with all of these things. So we were able to apply it. And then you start designing the project through the de-thinking process and ensure that you have an authentic assessment at the end. And that de-thinking process is your STEM intersection. And I included that GIF down there because Fultz usually likes to say at the end of our presentation, we're going to make the world a better place. So I found like the perfect GIF for that, but ready to make the world a better place, one PBL at a time.
And I guess this is where we ask if there's any questions, feel free to email us.